Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be looking at the Pirc defense. So the Pirc defense starts out with pawn to e4 from white. Black responds pawn d6. White moves pawn d4, and black develops knight to f6, attacking this pawn on e4. White would really like to just go ahead and bring his pawn to c4, but obviously since we are attacking his pawn on e4, he's going to develop his knight to c3. And from here we are going to bring our pawn to g6. And this is the Pirc defense right here. And as you can see, a couple things you do want to notice. One, the Pirc defense is a hyper-modern opening, basically meaning that we are right now not defending the center with our pawns. Instead, we are going to be fianchettoing our bishop to this g7 square. We have our knight nicely placed here on f6, and we're going to try to attack and defend the center with our minor pieces, and we're going to flank from the sides here. We're going to wait for our pawns to push forward later on, but we're first going to defend and attack the center with our minor pieces. So keep that in mind. Another thing you'll see, this is kind of a passive opening in the beginning. Obviously black has many fighting opportunities later on once he opens up the board and counterattacks later on. But black would really like early on in an aggressive game not to block his dark squared bishop, so this dark squared bishop can get into the board, attack the f2 pawn, and put a lot of pressure on the white king. But with this move of pawn to d6, we have blocked off this bishop, and this means two things. One, it means that more than likely we're going to fianchetto our bishop to g7. There's no reason for us to block off our dark square bishop if we have no reason to bring our bishop to g7 and fianchetto. Also, this means that we have our light square bishop. This is easily developed for us. We can bring this to any of these squares. And a lot of times as black, the light square bishop is one of your weakest minor pieces because a lot of time it gets blocked off early on. In the Pirc defense, the light square bishop does not get locked in. So if you play a lot of times with black and you see that your light square bishop isn't getting a lot of play, you may want to try this out because your light square bishop is actually going to be very valuable in this opening. So today we're going to look at the two main lines, the Austrian attack and the classical attack, and we're going to kind of look at what both sides should be thinking when they're playing. So the first is the Austrian attack, and that is simply pawn to f4, and this is the most aggressive opening that white can play against black. As you can see, all these pawns here are already attacking the center, and they're putting a lot of pressure on black. Black's going to have to play smart, or white can easily just march up the board and quickly checkmate the king. From here, as is with most of the moves that white's going to move, black's simply going to respond bishop to g7. Black would really like to develop his bishop to g7, and then he would just like to castle, and then he would like to start counterattacking. So more than likely, all the moves you're going to see from white, the most common ones you're going to see are f4 and knight to f3, but we're simply going to bring our bishop to g7, fianchetto our bishop, and then wait to see where they move. From here, the most common move in the main line, you're just going to see knight to f3, developing their knight to a very good square, the f3 square, behind this pawn here and putting more pressure on the center. As you can see, they're putting a lot of pressure on the center, and we're eventually going to have to counterattack or we're going to be in a lot of trouble. From here, like I said before, we're going to go ahead and castle. King safety, obviously number one priority, especially in the Pirc defense, since we're not attacking right now, we're on the defense. So if we're going to play on the defense and they're attacking us, we want to make sure our king is in safety. From here, white has a few options. One thing you may see him come at you and already attack with a move like pawn to e5. Here simply we can recapture with our pawn, and they have to choose. If they choose to capture with their pawn, their d pawn, then we can simply come in with our queen capture, and when he captures with his minor piece, he's really losing a good square with his knight on c3. More than likely, you're not going to see him capture there. Instead, you're going to see him capture with his pawn, his f-pawn. And then we can simply bring our knight to d5, which is a good square from now. Obviously, he can take it if he wants to trade off pieces. But as you can see here, we're eventually going to have to continue counterattacking. White has a very good setup. He can bring his bishop into the action. He can castle kingside. And he already has these two pawns in the center with great center control. He has his knights nicely developed. So black's really going to have to be cautious here. But the main line, if we go back a few moves, instead of pawn to e5, the main line is actually just bishop to d3. And from here, we're just going to develop our knight to c6. Really want to develop our minor pieces now, since we're going to need to put some pressure on the middle. And then from here, more than likely you'll see white castle kingside, obviously king safety. And then from here, we're going to bring our bishop into the action, bishop to g4. We obviously want to get this active, and this does two things. One, it gets our light square bishop active, pinning this knight down to the queen, but also it gives our knight a little outpost here on d7. Obviously, if our bishop is not developed yet and we bring our knight to d7, then our light square bishop is going to be blocked off, and that's really not what you want, especially in the Pirc defense, since it is kind of a passive defense at the very beginning. So this development move on g4 is very good for us, because now if he wants to come in, let's say with the move of pawn to e5, we have a few options. One of those options is just bring our knight back to d7, which is very good. We're still applying a lot of pressure, and we're waiting for white to make a move, and then we can counterattack. From here, you might simply see bishop to e3, and black has a lot of fighting moves in this position. Obviously, we said before, black has his pieces developed. We have king safety. We can start to push up the board if we want to. We can get our queen involved. So black has a very good game here. Second variation we want to go over is the classical defense. And we'll go ahead and get started once we move g7. Now the classical attack is going to be knight to f3, and this is probably going to be the most common that you're going to see. It's the main line in the Pirc defense, and what this does, it develops its knights to two great squares, knight to f3, knight to c3, and it opens up both lines for the bishops. The bishops can roam all the way on this h6 to c1, and they can roam from the f1 to the a6 squares. So very good diagonals. White has a lot of good development move, and he's going to have a very good game. And also he has very good center control. From here, as we said before, we're simply going to bring our bishop to g7. Obviously, we're attacking the center with our minor pieces from the flank position on the side. From here, you might see a couple different moves from white. You may see bishop to e2, or you also may see the simple move of pawn to h3. Keeping our bishop locked down. Obviously, white would not like our bishop to come to g4 because it's developing our bishop. Pinning down the knight to the queen, white is going to have to do something about this. Instead, you might see white simply move his pawn to h3, taking away that great square for us. From here, we're simply just going to castle kingside. If he doesn't, though, the main line is for bishop to come to e2, and then from here, like before, we're going to go ahead and simply castle kingside. From here, white's going to castle kingside, and then now we can bring our bishop to g4, developing our bishop, again giving another outpost for our knight to come to d7, which d7 is actually a pretty good square for our knight. We can still attack these two dark squares, which we are putting a lot of pressure on the dark squares with our dark square bishop here on g7. It frees him up so he can attack, and at the same way gets this knight out of harm's way if white decides to push down. So these are a few things that you want to think about in the Pirc defense. These are the most common that you'll see, the Austrian attack and the classical defense. Just keep in mind that if you are black, you are going to want to counterattack, and you are going to make sure that you have king safety. So if they're playing aggressive, if they're playing the Austrian attack, make sure that you do counterattack in the game, or you may lose pretty quickly. So, hope you guys enjoy this video. Hope you guys learned a lot. If you haven't already, please subscribe. If you haven't checked out the website, got a lot of new fun stuff on the website. That's www.thechesswebsite.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next video.